Section 3, page 6. He didn't in the least wish the future Miss Newland Archer to be a simpleton. He meant her, in parentheses, thanks to his enlightening companionship, to develop a social tact and readiness of wit, enabling her to hold her own with the most popular married women of the younger set, in which it was the recognized custom to attract masculine homage while playfully discouraging it. If he had probed to the bottom of his vanity, in parentheses, as he sometimes nearly did, he would have found that the wish that his wife should be as worldly wise and as eager to please as the married lady whose charms had held his fancy through 2 mildly agitated years, without, of course, any hint of the frailty which had so nearly marred that unhappy being's life, and had disarranged his own plans for a whole winter. How this miracle of fire and ice was to be created, and to sustain itself in a harsh world, he had never taken the time to think out, but he was content to hold his view without analyzing it, since he knew it was that of all the carefully brushed, white waistcoated, buttonhole flowered gentlemen who succeeded each other in the club box, exchanged friendly greetings with him, and turned their opera glasses critically on the circle of ladies who were the product of the system. In matters intellectual and artistic, Newland Archer felt himself distinctly the superior of these chosen specimens of old New York gentility. He had probably read more, thought more, and even seen a good deal more of the world than any other man of the number. Singly, they betrayed their inferiority, but grouped together they represented New York, and the habit of masculine solidarity made him accept their doctrine on all the issues called moral. He instinctively felt that in this respect it would be troublesome, and also rather bad form, to strike out for himself. Well, upon my soul, exclaimed Lawrence Lefferts, turning his opera glass abruptly away from the stage. Lawrence Lefferts was, on the whole, the foremost authority on form in New York. He had probably devoted more time than anyone else to the study of this intricate and fascinating question. But study alone couldn't account for his complete and easy competence. One had only to look at him, from the slant of his bald forehead and the curve of his beautiful fair mustache to the long patent leather feet at the other end of his lean and elegant person, to feel that the knowledge of form must be congenital in anyone who knew how to wear such good clothes so carelessly and carry such hate with so much longing grace. As a young admirer had once said of him, "If anybody can tell a fellow just when to wear a black tie with evening clothes and when not to, it is Larry Lefferts." And on the question of pumps versus patent leather Oxfords, his authority had never been disputed. "My God," he said, and silently handed his glass to old Sillerton Jackson. Newland Archer, following Lefferts' glance, saw with surprise that his exclamation had been occasioned by the entry of a new figure into old Miss Mingott's box. It was that of a slim young woman, a little less tall than May Welland, with brown hair growing in close curls about her temples, and held in place by a narrow band of diamonds. The suggestion of this headdress, which gave her what was then called a Josephine look, was carried out in the cut of the dark blue velvet gown rather theatrically cut up under her bosom by a girdle with a large old-fashioned clasp. The wearer of this unusual dress, who seemed quite unconscious of the attention it was attracting, stood a moment in the center of the box, discussing with Miss Welland the propriety of taking the latter's place in the front right-hand corner. Then she yielded with a slight smile and seated herself in line with Miss Welland's sister-in-law, Miss Lovell Mingott, who was installed in the opposite corner. Mr. Sillerton Jackson had returned the opera glass to Lawrence Lefferts. The whole of the club turned instinctively, waiting to hear what the old man had to say. For old Mr. Jackson was as great an authority on family as Lawrence Letters was on form. He knew all the ramifications of New York's cousinships, and couldn't only elucidate such complicated questions as that of the connection between the Mingotts, in parentheses, through the Torleys, with the Dallases of South Carolina, and that of the relationship of the elder branch of Philadelphia Torleys to the Albany Chiverses, in parentheses, on no account to be confused with the Mason Chiveres of University Place, but could also enumerate the leading characteristics of each family, as, for instance, the fabulous sittingness of the younger lines of Leffertses, in parentheses, the Long Island ones, or the fatal tendency of the Rushworths to make foolish matches, or the insanity recurring in every second generation of the Albany Chiverses, with whom their New York cousins had always refused to intermarry, with the disastrous exception of poor Medora Manson, who, as everybody knew, but then her mother was a Rushworth. In addition to this forest of family trees, Mr. Sillerton Jackson carried between his narrow hollow temples and under his soft touch of silver hair a register of most of the scandals and mysteries that had smoldered under the unruffled surface of New York society within the last 50 years. So far indeed did his information extend, and so acutely retentive was his memory, that he was supposed to be the only man who could have told you who was Julius Beaufort, the banker, really was, and what had become of handsome Bob Spicer, old Miss Manson Mingott's father, who had disappeared so mysteriously, in parentheses, with a large sum of trust money, less than a year after his marriage, on the very day that a beautiful Spanish dancer, who had been delighting thronged audiences on the old opera house on the Battery, had taken ship for Cuba. But these mysteries, and many others, were closely locked in Mr. Jackson's breast, for not only did his keen sense of honor forbid his repeating anything privately imparted, but he was fully aware that his reputation for discretion increased his opportunities of finding out what he wanted to know. The club box, therefore, waited in visible suspense while Mr. Sillerton Jackson handed back Lawrence Lefferts's opera glass. For a moment he silently scrutinized the attentive group out of his filmy blue eyes overhung by old veined lids. Then he gave his mustache a thoughtful twist, and simply said, "I didn't think the Mingotts would have tried it on." Chapter 2. Newland Archer, during this brief episode, had been thrown into a strange state of embarrassment. It was annoying that the box which was thus attracting the undivided attention of masculine New York should be that in which his betrothed was seated between her mother and aunt, and for a moment he couldn't identify the lady in the empire dress, nor imagine why her presence created such excitement among the initiated. Then light dawned on him, and with it came a momentary rush of indignation. No, indeed, no one would have thought the Mingots would have tried it on. But they had. They undoubtedly had. For the low-toned comments behind him left no doubt in Archer's mind that the young woman was May Welland's cousin, the cousin always referred to in the families as poor Ellen Olenska. Archer knew that she had suddenly arrived from Europe a day or two previously. He had even heard from Miss Welland, in parentheses, not disapprovingly, that she had been to see poor Ellen, who was staying with old Miss Mingot. Archer entirely approved of family solidarity, and one of the qualities he most admired in the Mingots was their resolute championship of the few black sheep that their blameless stock had produced. There was nothing mean or ungenerous in the young man's heart, and he was glad that his future wife shouldn't be restrained by false prudery from being kind, in parentheses, in private, to her happy cousin, but to receive Countess Olenska in the family circle was a different thing from producing her in public, at the opera of all places, and in the very box with the young girl whose engagement to him, Newland Archer, was to be announced within a few weeks. No, he felt as old Sillerton Jackson felt. He didn't think the Mingots would have tried it on. He knew, of course, that whatever man dared, in parentheses, within Fifth Avenue's limits, that old Miss Manson Mingot, the matriarch of the line, would dare. He had always admired the high and mighty old lady, who, in spite of having been only Catherine Spicer of Staten Island, with a father mysteriously discredited, and neither money nor position enough to make people forget it, had allied herself with the head of the wealthy Mingot line, married two of her daughters to foreigners, in parentheses, an Italian marquis and an English banker, and put the crowning touch to her audacities by building a large house of pale cream-colored stone. In parentheses, Van Brown sandstone seemed as much the only wear as a frock coat in the afternoon, in an inaccessible wilderness near the Central Park. End of the section, page 9.